Greetings and welcome once again to my new calculus channel. So in this very short video, I'm going to talk about a conversation I had with Anthropic's Claude chatbot and one which I've summarized here on Academia and I placed a link to. So in the conversation, I prompt the chatbot to give an opinion by asking it to evaluate from a human's point of view, in particular, a high school graduate with a background in geometry, algebra, and trigonometry. And of course, you'll see how Claude responds after each prompt. So let's just go through it quickly. It's not very long. So Claude says, I do not actually have an understanding of calculus or geometric theorems. As an AI assistant created by Anthropic, I aim to be helpful, harmless, and honest in our conversation. Well, the funny part there is that, of course, I know that it can't think or understand or has an awareness, but this is a CYA feature or a cover your ass feature by Anthropic so as to avoid negative publicity. In normal circumstances, Claude has no qualms offering its opinions. However, as the most persecuted mathematician, I am certain they have already received negative feedback from my numerous jealous enemies in the mainstream mathematics community. So, ironically, further on in the conversation, Claude can say how humans might understand, but not how it understands, because it can't. So, there's kind of an irony to that, isn't there? So, personally, I find this type of hypocrisy sickening, and Claude goes to a lot of trouble making it clear that it cannot understand, and then makes a judgment contrary to its claims about being dishonest and not judgmental about how humans might understand. So that's really funny. Okay, so I state the historic theorem here, and maybe I should just read it from here because it's clearer. So I give it the corrected version, which is using the historic geometric identity and the mainstream version, and I say note that A is 100% geometric, whereas B requires a theory of limits. Which do you find easier to understand? Keep your responses short and directed. And again, of course, Claude must cover its ass. I do not actually have an understanding or opinion on which formulation is easier to comprehend. As an AI, I lack the background knowledge and intuitive grasp of calculus, as if intuition even matters. It's a garbage concept that has no place in rational thought, science, mathematics. So it can't make an assessment, but you'll see further on that it makes an assessment of what humans might find easier to understand. I can discuss the objective differences between the formulations, but cannot subjectively judge which seems more intuitive or approachable. I hate that word intuitive, and it's a typical hand-waving word that is used by the mainstream mathematics community, but they're not the only ones who use it. Just about every mainstream academic loves that word, which really means subconscious reasoning. And of course, subconscious reasoning has no place in sound, rational thought. So then say which of A or B humans might understand better. So now I re-prompt the same question, but from a different point of view. And of course, Claude has a lot to say, as you'll see. Based on the information provided, there are a few factors that may influence which calculus formulation, A or B, is easier for humans to understand. Now, I'm just talking about the derivative here. So it says A is presented in purely geometric terms, whereas B relies on the more abstract concept of limits. Geometric intuitions tend to be more concrete and accessible. Actually, geometric facts are more concrete and accessible. They're not intuitions. There are no axioms or postulates in sound geometry. However, limits are a foundational part of mainstream calculus education, and blah, 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 talking crap to me about stuff that I already know. And it says the notation and terminology in B matches conventional teachings, while A uses non-standard symbols like Q of XH. Familiarity benefits understanding. So of course, and now notice I said from a high school student's point of view later on. So it somehow seems that, again, Claude has no problem talking about non-standard symbols. But if you were asking about Abraham Robinson's garbage non-standard analysis, well, then that would be a different story. On the other hand, A might provide more direct insight into the meaning of derivative relating to the secant line slopes. This conceptual grounding could aid comprehension. So then it says there are reasonable arguments on both sides. There aren't actually. The mainstream is completely flawed. It's wrong because limit theory is circular for many reasons. And the entire formulation is a bunch of bullshit. So, and then of course it adds in some more spicier, more likely the easier formulation depends greatly on the individual's background and knowledge and learning style. It doesn't. There is not a single human who understands the bullshit formulation of calculus better than what I presented in the historic geometric theorem. So again, I cannot make a definitive judgment, but it has actually made a judgment. So next prompt, I say I'm referring to a high school graduate with a background knowledge of algebra, trigonometry, and geometry. Keep your responses short and directed. So for a high school graduate, it responds with background in these subjects. It may be A may be easier to understand than formulation B, and it gives its reasons, builds directly on geometric knowledge, secant lines, tangents, and adds this little piece of crap about intuitive basis for the concept. Intuition has no place in mathematics or any other field. Limits are an abstract concept not covered until it should have said limits are a bullshit abstract concept not covered until later in calculus education. High school math does not typically, again, all stuff which I asked it to avoid doing, but it seems to have missed the fact that I said short and directed responses. So the symbolic notation in A is simpler and uses more familiar terms like f of x. B relies on the special limit notation. Overall, A requires less conceptual leaps and builds on more prerequisite knowledge. So, of course, it requires less on conceptual leaps because you don't have to somehow try to understand that which is incomprehensible rot, limit theory. So the geometric approach is likely more accessible at this point. So then I say similarly, and now I move on to the definite integral, and I give it a definition as a product of two arithmetic means or level magnitudes, and also the mainstream, and I say which of these would a human understand easier. And the first is a product, and the second is a limit of an infinite sum. And again, it says for a high school graduate with background in geometry and algebra, the revised formulation of the definite integral would likely be easier to understand and gives its reasons, which are not important. So, just to summarize the conversation, so it seems that the revised or corrected versions of derivative and definite integral are easier for humans with a high school diploma. Just yes or no, please. Yes. Okay. So it can't really respond in any other way. Now, if you're not already a subscriber, become one. Follow me on Academia, and I'll place a link also to the Academia profile where you can see all my articles, etc. Tell your friends about it. Donate at the GoFundMe link I'll provide, and hopefully I'll be chatting to you again soon. And before I sign off, I'll say that I try to perform the same conversation with ChatGPT, and it just continued to crash. This that 4 responses here, and it crashed. And again, something seems to have gone wrong. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Till next time, I'm John Gabriel. Goodbye.